Hi everyone, welcome to Deep Geek Live. A particular welcome if this is your first time watching one of these live streams. I'll just, I think, to start off with, say a little bit about how we run these things. They're slightly different from the scripted videos. I pick a topic. Today we're looking at Old Valyria in the world of Ice and Fire. In the future we're going to be branching out into Lord of the Rings things as well. I ask my patrons in advance for some questions, and I'll work my way through those questions, and I'll also try and pick up as many questions and comments as I can from the chat as we're going through. The chat sometimes moves quite quickly, so I can't promise to pick up everything, but I'll try to do the best I possibly can. But I had last week off, as you know, just taking a little bit of time. Thankfully, in the UK, the lockdown is slowly starting to ease, and if you are watching live, then you might have noticed that I did manage to fit in some time to get to the hairdresser. So apologies if you were a fan of the Hobbit locks, but I'm sure they will be returning at some point. Anyway, I just wanted to say a very quick thank you to Matt Martin for the super chat, saying thank you for all you do. You got me to actually crack the books open and dive in. That makes me very happy. That's exactly what I want to do, just encourage people to be engaging in these fantastic bits of literature. Often these things are tied in with the TV shows, but it's the books that we come back to again and again. And Mara Lee as well, thank you so much, saying just my show of love, appreciation and support for all the fabulous content, wonderful stories and great merch. Thank you for all you've done to get us through the long night. Hugs to gorgeous Dan. That's Dan, my dog. Just the last thing before we dive into this topic, what I try to do, I can't remember where I got up to last week, but I try always just at the top of these live streams just to give a little bit of a flavor of where we're at with all of the TV shows that are going to be coming. We're going to soon enter in a golden age of high fantasy TV, high budget, well produced, well acted, high fantasy TV shows. But so you're aware, we've got The Witcher season 2 has finished filming. That has already been slotted in for the final quarter of this year, so we will be seeing that October, November, December. The Wheel of Time TV show, based on the best-selling books, that is restarting production soon. The actors have already started flying back out there. I think they're filming it in the Czech Republic. So that's got, I think, just 2 more episodes to film. So I expect we will see that as well, appearing somewhere towards the end of this year. House of the Dragon, the first of many spin-offs we're going to be getting from Game of Thrones, that has not yet started filming, but the production units are starting to crop up. And for those who know that part of the world, there are some HBO vans parked on St Michael's Mount down in Cornwall, which I'm guessing might be the new base for Dragonstone. I don't know, but that's a beautiful part of the world if you don't know it. So I'm quite excited about that. Lord of the Rings is carrying on filming. They're still filming the first season. They're most of the way through that now. I think they've probably got a couple more months to go on that. So I expect that we might see that sometime, maybe not later this year, maybe early next year. So a lot of things in the works and a lot of things going to be coming through over the course of the next year. Roman Ayakovets or Lakovets saying, I've heard some fans say that the book series has now reached a scope and level of complexity that makes it literally impossible to finish in a satisfying way. Do you have any thoughts on this? I do have any thoughts on this. So A Song of Ice and Fire, we have 2 books left. What George R. R. Martin has done is he has expanded this story out. So where we're at in the books in this story is at the widest point. This is the most complex point. Yes, it will feel as if it's quite hard to draw that to a conclusion, and I suspect George R. R. Martin many times himself has felt that it's quite hard to draw that to a conclusion. But what we will see is things start coming back together, and these things will the threads will start to cross and weave once more. So what we've got Daenerys off in the Dothraki Sea. We've got things happening over in Meereen. We've got Arya in Bravos. We've got Sansa at the Eyrie. We've got people on the Wall, King's Landing, everywhere. People stretched out right across 2 continents. What you will find by the end of the Winds of Winter is everything contracting back. Arya will be coming back into Westeros. Tyrion, Dany, that invasion will come into Westeros. Sam will not be spending more than a book, I'm sure, down in Old Town. He will be heading back up to the north. So all of the stories are going to start contracting in. So yes, it is a very, very complex tapestry that George R. R. Martin is weaving. This is why it's taking him so long to write it. But if you're a fan, as I'm sure we all are, of overanalyzing his blog posts, then his most recent one was quite sad, actually. He was talking about the amount of friends that he's been losing recently. But he did just drop in there, almost as an offhand comment, that he's going to be coming out from his mountain retreat in a couple of months, he says. Now, if you wish to overanalyze that, then you say his mountain retreat is where he goes to finish off books. So what is he expecting to happen in a couple of months? Is it just a break, or does he think he's near the end of it? I've long given up trying to guess or estimate when the Winds of Winter is going to happen. But I think I'm starting to get the feeling that he's getting closer. He's talking about finishing it now rather than just ploughing on. Okay, so with that all said, let's get into some questions. We're talking about Old Valyria today, so we're going to talk a bit about the history, a bit about what it is now, a little bit of tinfoily speculation, I suspect, as well, about the sort of the nature of magic and what was going on there, what is going on there, and all the rest of it. But by way of history, it's, as with all of these things, George R. R. Martin has left it a bit vague. He wants it to have this kind of aura of legend about it, the history of Old Valyria. And a few of my patrons have picked up on the fact that there are some kind of Atlantis vibes to the way that Old Valyria is described, that this just disappears in a great cataclysm. This height of civilization has then gone, and there are some bits and pieces of it left for us to be just sort of like pick out, but the knowledge has gone as well. There's also a very clear Roman Empire feel about this. The fall of Rome after the fall is very Western-centric view of the world, but the way that it was written about for many, many years, when you get the fall of Rome, you get the Dark Ages, all of that civilization, all of that knowledge and understanding was gone. So that's the kind of feel we've got, as you get this place where huge amounts of knowledge, of culture were there, but then it all vanished. In the Doom of Valyria, it vanished overnight. Now, that's not to say that this was a perfect or good place. They were slavers. Lots of dark magic was definitely going on there. So this kind of idealized Atlantean view is not exactly right. George R. R. Martin doesn't just cut and paste things from elsewhere. He takes inspiration from things and then tweaks it to his own purposes. But we have this culture that developed. It's not the oldest culture in the world, but it developed thousands of years earlier. And the people who were there learned how to bond with dragons, and this was then the source of their power. And over centuries, thousands of years, they expanded out what was we think of as an empire, but it didn't operate quite like that. It was called the Valyrian Freehold. This expanded out over much of Essos before the Doom, before the Fall. We'll talk about the Fall. We'll talk about the Doom itself in a bit more detail later. But this was clearly the hub not just of political control, but also lots of knowledge. Valyrian steel is there. The knowledge of how Valyrian steel was made was then lost. There are just a few people who still know how to reforge it. So the Valyrian Empire had gone, and what was left after that was this huge political vacuum, and the Dothraki just emerged and destroyed huge amounts of settlements right across the middle of Essos. The free cities to the west all claimed their freedom and fought amongst themselves. Over further east in Slavers Bay, then the old empire of Gis, which had been the big empire before Valyria came up, they started re-establishing themselves with their old tradition. So what we see with Marine and the like is a reassertion of ancient traditions from before Valyria were in control. So that's the sort of the outline of the history of old Valyria. Just pick up on a couple of things in the chat. Dominic Vaughan saying thank you very much, saying just a wee payday. Thank you for all your great work and ability to sustain the channel and keep us entertained through the dark days of lockdown. You're very welcome. Thank you very much. That's kind. Manu, thank you, saying, hi Robert, what might we see in the next books about Dragonstone that is common with Valyria? Thank you. Well, I think it's great. It's an interesting question. I think the thing, and we'll come on to Dragonstone in just a moment, actually, talking about the extent of the Valyrian freehold. But as far as the books are concerned, this is the only bit of Westeros. It's not even mainland Westeros, obviously. It's an island, but it's the only bit of Westeros that Dany ever had set foot on. She was born there. And this is her home base. But more importantly, this is where Valyrians feel at home and dragons feel at home more than anywhere else in the Westeros. So this is logically where Dany, it happened on the show, but I think it makes absolute sense for this to happen in the books. This is logically where Dany will go with her dragons when she's about to launch her invasion of Westeros. And the dragons will almost certainly take up their lodgings. There are caves there and all the rest of it where all the dragons used to be. So I think that we will see Dragonstone becoming once more what it once was. And so that is the kind of the echo that is there. The dragons liked it, and that will set people starting to think and worry, because while the dragons were on Dragonstone, they were laying eggs, and the eggs hatched. And it's one thing having Dany and 3 dragons coming and potentially invading Westeros. It's another thing entirely for there to be potentially more dragons coming on track. If it's just 3 and then they die out, that's massive, but that you can see a way through. If there's a potential for more, then that's a problem. And this incidentally is where the rumors that the Maesters may well have got rid of the dragons the first time around. I did a video on that relatively recently, if you're interested where that comes from, because when they had an opportunity, and they did have an opportunity, not just to kill the dragons killed each other during the Dance of the Dragons, but to prevent the next generation of dragons from coming, they almost certainly took it. So a bit of a digression, but when you're saying about the commonalities with Valyria and Dragonstone, they're both, and the reason why they like it is because Dragonstone is built, it's a volcanic island, effectively. It's got these hot vents that come up, and it smells bad, it smells gassy and horrible all around. But if you're wandering around the island, then lots of steam is sort of bubbling up from the rocks and all the rest of it. So that is the kind of the equivalent to Valyria, which was legendarily built on the 14 flames, 14 volcanoes. Okay, so let's go with a question from Stacey Burke to start with. Hello, Robert. We have hints from Westerosi history that Valyrians had visited and traded with Westeros well before Aegon's conquest. Great houses possessing Valyrian steel for centuries, for instance. But Westerosi history does not mention Valyrians that I recall prior to the conquest. I've always found this so curious and would love to hear your thoughts. Linked in with this question from Johnny Giantsbane saying, "Hi Robert, and greetings from the lands of always winter. Myself and Jonesy Sixskins would like to hear your thoughts on why the Valyrians stopped at Dragonstone at the height of their power. Tyrion mused on this, claiming that Westeros was where the wealth was. Our contention might be that they were cautious of the magic and the green seers of the children of the forest and the impact that might have on them and the dragons. And after all, the wall has an impact on the dragons, which stops them wanting to cross it." Okay, so lots to unpack there, but this goes back to ancient history. George R. R. Martin has said that once there was a time when dragons did fly over the entirety of Planetos, Westeros, as well as Essos. So this appears to be early on, perhaps before the Valyrian freehold, perhaps the earlier days of it, but certainly later on, the Valyrian freehold did not extend out to Westeros. And I'll come back to this a couple of times, because it perhaps counterintuitively we naturally think of the Valyrians as being this great conquering nation. They weren't so much. They actually lived in peace as much as they could with their neighbors. With the Rhoynar, for many centuries, yes, it ended in war and tragedy, but for many centuries they lived in peace with them. When they conquered lands, so to speak, it wasn't so much an actual conquer, invasion, and sort of move themselves into an area. They would just place their people in charge of the cities. And this is where most of the free cities, Braavos is a different story, but most of the free cities, this is how they used to operate, was that they would have one or a number of people who were in charge, the magisters or whatever they would style themselves locally, who were basically running it on behalf of Valyria, but were allowed to have a certain amount of freedom. So the Valyrian freehold wasn't just about conquering stuff for the sake of it. They did, towards the end of their time, start buying up a few little islands in the Narrow Sea. There are three. You've got Driftmark, Claw Island, and Dragonstone. And Dragonstone was the biggest, the westernmost outpost of the Valyrian freehold. So they were starting to slowly creep over that way. But as much as anything else, that was about controlling trade. That was about the Narrow Sea. Maybe at some point it could have been a foothold to invading Westeros, but there's no indications that they were thinking about it too much. So they didn't. And it wasn't until the Targaryens arrived there before the Doom, and even then the Targaryens waited 100 years before they invaded Westeros. So what was it holding them back? It wasn't just, I suspect, this lack of conquering zeal, although that is an element of it, I suspect. The dragons we get from the world of Ice and Fire, which is George R. R. Martin's sort of history of the world. It's written by the Maesters, so we shouldn't take it as absolute truth and law. This is written deliberately as biased history, and some of it quite speculative. But they do talk about in there, the Maesters think that the Dragon Riders did go to Westeros early on. Old Town in particular is mentioned as being a place where they met and they traded with the older folk, presumably the children of the forest, maybe the giants, and then something made them turn their back on Westeros, and we do not know what this is. Some tragedy, one of the Maesters speculates, which possibly is tied in with the otherwise rather bizarrely named Battle Isle, which is the island in Old Town where the High Tower is on. It's called Battle Isle. It's been known as that forever, but there's no battle associated with it. So perhaps there was some battle. Perhaps that was the thing which made them turn away. There's also the possibility of there being some legends, some myths, some prophecies about Westeros which might have put the Valyrians off. Septon Barth is quoted as being as saying that there was a prophecy about the doom of man, or the doom of men will come from Westeros, and that's dismissed by the maesters in the World of Ice and Fire. Septon Barth, though, is usually right, so perhaps that's an element of it. There was also, it would appear, there was another prophecy about the doom of the Valyrian freehold coming from Lannister gold, and so it may well be that they sort of held back, not wishing to sort of get involved in Lannister gold, and that so just steering well clear of Westeros. So there are a lot of these different possibilities. There's also, I think, that the thing which you pick up on Johnny Giantsbane, the magical thing, I think, is also possible, because there are elements here of magic that perhaps seems to be anti-dragon in some way. You talk about the wall. We get the one reference in Fire and Blood to a dragon not wishing to go. Alysanne Targaryen tries to fly north of the wall, and her dragon refuses a few times. It's not clear why, but perhaps this is the magic that is in the wall that is there. So it's entirely possible. And there's also skin changing, which we don't really hear so much about in Essos, but is definitely a thing with the old magic in Westeros. And we haven't yet seen the possibility that it might be possible to warg into a dragon. We do not know. We haven't seen that play out, because in the story we've had so far, the dragons have yet to come to Westeros. And I think crucially, and we don't really think about it like this often, but when the dragons were in Westeros with the Targaryens, they didn't actually threaten the Weirwood network. The Andals did that. They destroyed the First Men did that, cutting down Weirwood trees and all the rest of it. Targaryens, not really. They didn't try to burn down the Isle of Faces. They didn't really much go to the north, where there's a lot of Weirwoods, and obviously worship of the old gods. They largely just left it alone and did their own thing. So the dragons weren't as big a threat as we thought. So perhaps the Weirwoods did not feel the need to do much of defending themselves. Okay, let's dip back into the chat. Alana Prestane of Bravos saying, thanks, Robert. I've been watching you now for 2 years. So happy anniversary. Oh, thank you. Well, happy anniversary back to you as well. That's really kind. And yours is one of the names that I look out for as well. So that's very kind. Thank you very much. Andrew Kay in the chat saying, it seems that the trade and interaction with the Valyrians stayed relatively peripheral. It does not seem that much of Valyrian tech and secrets came over to Westeros. No, that's true. The only thing that sort of might be it is on Battle Isle in Old Town, as I was talking about, where the base of what is now the High Tower is a sort of a fused black stone, which could be linked across to a lot of the fused black stones we see over in Essos. If so, it's a hint that there's perhaps some of that technology did move across. And again, there's another hint that there was a link with the Valyrians over on Westeros. Nate Phipps saying, why did the Doom spell the end of all dragons and dragon lords aside from the Targaryens? Surely some would have been on other parts of the empire. Yes, they were. So this is picked up in the World of Ice and Fire, because on the face of it, yeah, doesn't seem to make much sense. The way it's explained, and I think we just have to take this as how it is. The 14 volcanoes erupted. So massive explosion, everything that was on the ground clearly destroyed, and so much fire and brimstone and ash and everything got flung up into the sky. Any dragons in the air, any dragons that were trying to escape the Valyrian Peninsula were just felled like that. So all the dragons that happened to be there, and all the dragon lords that happened to be there, were gone. The point you're raising is, what about the ones who were elsewhere? And there were some elsewhere. The Targaryens, clearly hundreds of miles away over in Dragonstone, so they survived. There we hear about one in, I think it was in Volantis, who decides that he thinks he's the only one left, so he's going to go back on his dragon with an army and just disappeared. There also we hear about a few who were in Lys. Now, Lys is one of the free cities. This was basically the pleasure island for the Valyrians. A lot of them went over there and just sunned themselves and had a nice time. We're told, once rumor got out that Valyria had blown up, and I'm sure they would have been able to see it, the earthquakes and felt it. The earthquakes will have been there. The sky will have turned black, and all the rest of it. We're told that the dragon riders were killed, and that the dragons themselves, thousands, just descended on them and destroyed them. Because let's not forget, these were the slavers. These were the people who were holding people in bondage. So they took the opportunity. So that's the story that we're told, is that yes, a few did survive out and about, but they got killed by the people turning on them. There are some others, obviously, who survived, not the dragon riders, but other members of the sort of the aristocracy of Valyria. So, and in Volantis, as probably the biggest example of this, in Volantis there are those who they call themselves of the old blood, people who can trace their direct ancestry back to Valyria. There are many in other cities as well, but that's probably the biggest example of it. So lots did survive, the dragons did not. Kelly Johnson saying, did the Children of the Forest warg a dragon at Battle Isle? Yeah, so if you'll allow me to put a tinfoil hat on, that entirely is possible. If you follow the chain of logic through, then the evidence doesn't say this is what happened, but it's entirely possible that what happened was that they were flying over there, and then for whatever reason somebody walked into a dragon, and then they suddenly realized that there was magic here that was more powerful than theirs. There was a fight, and they left, and they never came back. So that's entirely possible. If walking into a dragon is possible, which we have yet to see exactly, but it would be the kind of thing which would make people turn away from the entire continent, I suspect. Catherine Furseth, thank you very much. I've got questions from you on Patreon in just a moment. So Targaryen was not one of the biggest houses in Valyria. Could this explain their reluctance for conquest of Westeros? It could. It could. I think the thing is, because we look back at this and think the Targaryens were going to invade, that's always in our mind. But actually, if you take this as, well, why would they invade? If they're not people who immediately think, I'm going to conquer an entire continent? Yes, they could do, but that doesn't mean that they're definitely going to. So might it be a matter of the fact that they weren't one of the larger houses? I think they probably would have got over that relatively swiftly, is my general view. They certainly, by the time they invaded, they had this Targaryen exceptionalist idea going on, that they were more important than everybody else. They were a breed apart, more they followed different rules to everyone else. So certainly by the time Aegon invaded, they had got over any kind of inferiority complex there. My general take is it sounds like the boring answer, but most people don't wake up and think, well, where shall I conquer today? And so that is what it is that Aegon was the first one to actually get that proper thought in their head. And I think that's a good thing in many ways. Smith Crazy, thank you so much, saying, how do you think the Dragon Valyrian ability to relate started? Were they just Valyrians that came out to dragons and they were cool, or dragons decided to chill and not eat those people around them? Well, again, this is one of those things that George R. R. Martin has kept deliberately vague. But what seems to have been the case is that there was some element of genetic experimentation going on with the Valyrians. Now, I can certainly imagine that there seems to have been a dragons. You can bond with dragons, or at least make sure that they don't. They're not trying to kill you, just as you could any other intelligent animal. But actually getting the relationship, the bond between the Valyrian and the dragon seems to have been some element of gene splicing, is probably how we would put it this way. They seem to have done lots of experiments down there in beneath Valyria. All of their art is about bits of different animals together, kind of the Sphinx kind of feel to it. We get the stories of if you go to Fire and Blood, when you get Arya Targaryen coming back, it's a horrible story that George R. R. Martin wrote. She came back and she had like these from Valyria, it would appear, and crawling, growing inside her with these sort of like worm things with faces and arms. That seems to be like some sort of gene thing going on there, experimentation that's just left over from the time of Valyria. So given the fact that Targaryens do sometimes give birth to babies that have draconic features to them, that seems to imply that there is some magical dragony bit to them, and that seems to have been the thing that allowed them to bond with dragons. Cloaked One saying, "G'day, Robert. G'day." And Dan the dog. Currently, Dan is, as always, he's taken himself up to bed. Currently listening to this while I watch hot air balloons take off. Well, I love hearing what people are doing while they're watching this. Hot air balloons is excellent. Let's go to, and thank you for the super chats. Kelly Johnson saying, similar disaster at Asshai Shadow as Valyria. So Asshai is a city which is under the shadow. It's always in darkness, and it clearly was a much bigger city than. Well, it is a massive city, but it is hugely underpopulated. Most of the buildings are not populated. I don't think it was the same thing, because what happened in Valyria is the entire peninsula exploded. The whole thing just got destroyed. Whatever's going on in Asshai is not that. I think I had another question. Paladin Pony just picking up a random question saying, some people think that weirwood arrows can kill a dragon. Do you agree with this? It's possible. We haven't really, and so there seems to have been an attempt to do it. This was Torrhen Stark's half brother, seems to have carved himself some weirwood arrows and was willing, when the Targaryen invasion was on the go, was willing to try and shoot the dragons with weirwood arrows. This is magical against magical, so it would be interesting to see what was going on. So yes, it's entirely possible. Brian Scriven asking about the situation with the Valyrians and the curse of the Lannister Gold. I will get onto that in connection with the Doom of Valyria, if that's okay. If I don't, somebody remind me. Berus Aurelius saying, could the Hellhorns have been created to stop wargs from taking over dragons? The sound causes the dragons enough pain that the warg is forced out. So this is a reference to what's known as the Hellhorn or Dragonbinder, this huge Valyrian horn that Euron appears with, claims he got it from old Valyria, and he claims he can control dragons with it. And he sends Victarion over to Slaver's Bay in order for it to be used for that purpose, because he wants a dragon. Could it have been used to stop wargs from taking over dragons? I mean, it's possible. The only throwaway explanation I think we have for it is Dany remembering offhandedly, and this is one of those things that clearly is teeing us up for this being important later, when she's flying off on Drogon into the Dothraki Sea. She remembers that the Valyrians of old had magical horns which they could use to control their dragon, because Drogon, at this point in the story, Dany is not controlling Drogon. Yes, they've got a connection. Yes, she can sometimes say Dracarys and Drogon does his thing. Yes, all of that. But Drogon flies off, and then when she's in Meereen, and then flies back, and she climbs onto the back of him, and then he flies away again, and she can't control him. There is not an element of control going on there. So what seems to be the case, from the very limited hints that we get, is that Targaryens and Valyrians can create a bond between the human and the dragon, but which does allow the human over time, as the bond develops, to sort of influence where the dragon goes, but the dragon is never tamed or controlled. If you wish to actively control a dragon, then you have to use one of those horns. But as I say, we haven't got all of the information yet. Kairos Ballerina says, but who did the experimentation? The Great Emperor of the Dawn, or the Valyrians themselves? We don't know. We have very limited information. But the implication of all of this is that it was the Valyrians who are the ones who managed to get their the link with the dragons. So that was when whatever was going on was I was going to say perfected. It's not really perfected, but that was when they managed to reach the point at which they could be in control of dragons, and then they could be in control of an empire. The Great Empire of the Dawn gets a huge amount of interest because it is so ancient, but George R. R. Martin has written things about that are deliberately trying to show us and tell us that this is legend. So we can't take literally what we read about the Great Empire of the Dawn. So, for example, the first emperor lived, I think, 10,000 years. He was carried around in a palanquin carved out of a single pearl by his 1,000 wives, after which he went up to heaven. This is written as legend, and so we can't take any of those things as literal truth. What we can do is try and take the themes from them and see what we can get from that. The Great Emperor of the Dawn, there do seem to be, there's references to sort of monkey tails and tiger women. So there are hints that there might be sort of links between humans and animals there, but not dragons. Dragons came with Valyrians. So the people who did the experimentation, I think, were the Valyrians. Kelly Johnson, I see super chat. Thank you very much. Looks like it was retracted. Not quite sure. Maybe one of the moderators can highlight that if that was something for me. Randy Babandi, thank you very much for the super chat. Saying, considering what happened to old Valyria, do you think it's possible that a full suit of Valyrian armor would just be laying around for Euron to find, especially one that seemed to fit him? I mean, no. So Euron, this is in the pre-release chapter from The Winds of Winter. Euron, that's the Forsaken. We see this through the eyes of Aeron Greyjoy, who's not in the clearest of minds at the time, it has to be said, but he sees Euron in what appears to be Valyrian steel armor. And Euron's already claimed to have got lots of different things from Valyria. Now, did he? I mean, he certainly, I suspect, took things from other places that originally came from Valyria. Now, in a sort of semi-canon source, then the Dragonbinder, this was the World of Ice and Fire app. It says that he captured Dragonbinder not from old Valyria, but from the warlocks of Karth who were on a boat hunting for Dany. So it's not beyond him to claim that, but I think that he almost certainly did go in and around it. Whether he actually stopped and wandered around the smoking ruins of the city is a completely different matter. As you say, the whole thing just completely was destroyed. But the peninsula itself may have gone, but there are lots of little islands, and then the further up and out from that you go, there are the remains of other cities that were Valyrian cities. So, for example, you get Mantaris. Now, Mantaris is on what's called the Devil Road. It's a Valyrian road that survived, and nobody stops at Mantaris because the people there seem to be deformed and unfriendly. Whatever happened with the Doom of Valyria, which was a magical explosion as well as just a physical one, I suspect. The humans seem to have survived there, which seems to imply that perhaps some things might have survived there, and so it's possible. Did he go there and pick it up out of the ruins of old Valyria itself? No. But could he have gone nearby and picked it from a raid on a bit that somehow managed to survive? Yes. Okay, I think with that, let's go back to some questions from my patrons. Question from Dominic Vaughan saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope you're well." I think someone asked, but do we know how far east the Valyrian freehold extended? Okay, so this is... and Eric Ferg, following on from this, saying, why did it take 5 wars for Ghis to be annihilated by Valyria? How was Ghis, the old emperor of Ghis, able to win any wars against dragons? Okay, so in terms of the extent of the Valyrian freehold, the Valyrian Empire, if you imagine a map of Essos, then all of there was a huge peninsula where Valyria was. Then if you go across all from sort of the west of that into the area of what we now know as the Free Cities, you get up the River Rhoyne, from Volantis all the way up there. Doesn't quite get as far as Bravos, but does extend up to the north, goes all the way east across the continent, stopping before you get to all of the Dothraki Sea. The Dothraki Sea extended since the end of the Valyrian freehold, but Vaes Dothrak was not conquered. Then you go down to the south. It extended out across to Slaver's Bay, where we get sort of marine and all of that, and a little bit further, but did not seem to go to Karth. So it's, if you think of it being sort of the western and southern bits, the southwest of Essos, then you're roughly right. Now, in terms of Old Ghis was the the empire that preceded the Valyrian freehold. This was the big empire that was there before. It's effectively, if we're thinking of it, the Valyrian freehold as being like Rome, it's very much got a kind of an Egyptian feel to it. This is where the architecture of the pyramids in Marine and the like comes from. So they were the empire that was there at the time, and they saw the rise of Valyria, and there were 5 wars between the old Empire of Old Geese and the Valyrian freehold. Now, how could they win these? Well, they didn't. They saw dragons and thought, okay, we want them. And they tried to go and get them, and they lost the first war. And then they waited a little bit more, got slightly different allies, tried again and again and again. And during this time, the Valyrian freehold gained in power. So each time it was stronger, and eventually, by the time of the 5th war, that was when they sort of turned around and go, you know what, rather than just waiting for them to keep on attacking us and us swatting them away, we'll just go and destroy them. So that was how it was. And it sort of fits in with this this feel that I was trying to get across earlier, that we shouldn't see the Valyrians as being always first thinking about conquest. That's not how this seemed to work for them. Yes, they were ruthless. They were merciless when they needed to. They would take out entire civilizations. I'm not trying to paint them as being this kind of peace-loving people, but their first thought was not war. That's why it took 5 wars before they finally said, you know what, we're just going to get rid of this this rival empire. Glenn Thrasher, thank you so much for the super sticker, which I'm not entirely sure what that is. I'm going to go with an avocado flying through the air. But thank you very much. Shah saying, hi, Robert. I hope your time off last week was pleasant. It was. Thank you very much. Very quick question. How many named people do you think have actually visited Valyria since its fall? I'd specifically be curious if that one Lannister uncle might have made it that far. And Lawnduck20 asks similarly, welcome back. We hear tales of Gerion Lannister, Tom and the Second Lannister, entire armies, etc., disappearing in Valyrian and Smoking Sea. So how on earth did Euron survive? Do you think he's lying? I tend to believe that he's telling the truth because he has Dragonbinder and Valyrian steel armor. But what do you say? Okay, so who has been there? Well, we the people that sort of are name checked there. You get Tommen the Second. So this was Tommen the Second Lannister. So this was when the Lannisters were kings of the Rock, went off with their Valyrian steel sword, Bright Raw, to what was the smoking ruins of Old Valyria at the time. This was before the Targaryen conquest of Westeros. So in that 100 years or so when the Targaryens were sitting on Dragonstone. And he went off to try and get some treasure from Old Valyria, and he disappeared. Then many years later, Uncle Gerion Lannister, this is Tyrion's favorite uncle. He remembers him as being somebody who laughed, who taught him tumbling, who he had a good time with, very much compared to Tywin, who was obviously not the life and soul of the party. Gerion thought, hey, I want to go back and try and hunt down where did our family Valyrian steel sword get to. He heads off. We hear reports that he got as far as Volantis. Then his crew said, well, we're not going to go to Valyria. What, are you crazy? He hired some slaves, it would appear, and carried on. That's the last we hear of him. I mentioned Arya Targaryen a while ago. For those who haven't read that bit of Fire and Blood, she was a Targaryen princess around within the first 100 years of the Targaryens' rule. She was, there was a sort of a probable twin sister swap, but she was twice the named heir to the Iron Throne, never actually became queen, though, but she jumped onto Balerion the Black Dread, the greatest dragon that Westeros had ever seen. And Balerion, when she was still a child, and Balerion just flew off. And we don't know where, but the clear implication is Valyria. Flew back, Balerion had a huge gash down his side, lots of wounds, and she was in that horrific state that I mentioned before, and she died very quickly. So she almost certainly went to Valyria and did return. And then we get Euron, who claims to have been there. So those are the named people we have. Just to wrap up what I was saying about Euron a few minutes ago, my general take is that when he talks about it one time, I can't remember the exact words, but he talks about sailing the smoking seas and exploring the lands of Old Valyria or something. He doesn't say, I went to Old Valyria and just walked around there. The clear implication is that he did go to that part of the world. Maybe he got off somewhere, as I say, near Mantaris, wandered around for a bit. But yes, he survived. What he probably didn't do was go to the epicenter of where the exploded peninsula was, where probably there were some horrific things waiting for him. But he did go to that area. He may have picked up some stuff from around that area, or he may have picked them up from raiding various other people. The whole point is we do not know, and it actually doesn't matter that much because it doesn't affect who he is as a character. The fact is that he was willing to go to that place that nobody else was anyway. Chaos Spartan, do you think it's possible to venture into Valyria post-Doom via flight? Yeah, I see no reason why not. That's the main... it's by boat is the problem. So it would be interesting if Dany gets on Drogon and does fly over. It would be absolutely fascinating. If it's going to happen, it's going to be in the Winds of Winter. That would be pretty amazing. I don't know the extent to which she will fly or whether she'll stay with her ship, but maybe she will look down and we'll see some stuff. That is the only point, I think, in this entire story when we're going to be able to see anything there. George R. R. Martin may well not be able to resist just some hints, some things that she sees that look slightly dragonish on the ground but without wings, something along those lines. I suspect we might get a few hints of that, but it's not by any means certain. Henry Cavill, hi Henry, thank you so much for the super sticker. I mean, an egg, and I can't even see what that is, but thank you, I very much appreciate that. Joe Magician's in the chat. Hi, Joe. If you're looking out for an excellent Song of Ice and Fire channel, do go and check out Joe Magician. He does some fantastic theory videos, and I'm sure someone will put a link in the chat. Then Joe saying Roderick the Reader shakes Euron to his core just by suggesting he never went there and runs off to pout. Pretty bad poker face on old Euron. Yeah, so Roderick the Reader is this guy in the Ironborn, and he basically says, "Really? Did you really go there?" So this is questioning whether Euron actually went there, but the whole point is Euron's about the bluster. Question, did I get any more questions in the chat? Greet Weirwood is saying links in the chat aren't working, in which case I highly recommend that you once you've finished watching this, obviously you go onto YouTube and hunt for Joe Magician. You will find him very easily. I have absolutely no idea, but I hope you're well, Matt. And yeah, they're okay videos, as he says himself. Okay, let's. Question. Matt Martin saying, "Do you think the ruins are overrun with all the strange creatures they created in times past?" I think some ruins will be, but so this is a peninsula. This isn't just like a city. This is the way I think we need to imagine this, is that where the mountains were, that the whole thing blew up. There will be some sort of jagged little islands going on. There will be some larger parts. What was the peninsula will now be just sort of a mainland, but sort of slowly descending down into the sea, that kind of thing. There may well be some things left in some of those areas, but we don't know. With the strange creatures, my take is when they're talking about these the Valyrians delving deeper and deeper into the mines underneath, into the volcanoes, and you get these stories. These come up when Arya's talking to the Faceless Men, incidentally, the Kindly Man. This idea that the miners there, the slaves there, they could be sort of cracking away at some stone, and behind that there will be some strange creature that has been growing under there, living in the lava. That is the kind of feel that we've got, which is that the magic that created them required fire and blood, and the fire therefore might not have killed everything. It would have killed the sort of the dragons themselves, but the stuff that just it survived in those kinds of extreme heats, they would still be there. So that is the feel we have, is that you go back there, there are whatever is left over from those experiments just still there. And Google is deleting all the links. Well, I'm sorry about that, guys. In the chat, if you're watching this live, I will see if there's anything after this. I'll see whether there's anything I can do at my end. But for the time being, apologies that the links aren't working. Let's go to questions from my patrons. James Sledge, missed not seeing you on your live stream last week. Hope all is splendid. Yes, it is splendid. Thank you very much. The Valyrians are famed for their use of blood magic and engineering new breeds of beings with magic, possibly even engineering the dragons and the dragon-riding Targaryens, for instance, by merging species together. This strikes me as not dissimilar from Lord of the Rings and how Saruman bred the Uruk-hai under Isengard. We know George R. R. Martin is a huge Tolkien fan. Do you think this provided any of the inspiration for George to concoct the wondrous strangeness of some of old Valyria? It's possible. So certainly, and I was re-listening. This is my thing nowadays. I'm listening back through stories, not just rereading them. But I was re-listening to when the Ents went to Isengard in the Two Towers, and what you get there is that they let the Isen rush out to the river, and that then washes through. You'll remember it from the films, from the movies, and it washes through Isengard, and then it sort of goes down into where clearly Saruman's had people sort of digging underground, and we see steam and vapor rise up. So the feeling is there of this like the smoking sea you get, which is what is now, what was old Valyria is now called the Smoking Sea, because it still has this sort of steamy, smoky surface to it, and it is smoke, and that is the feel definitely that was there after the waters were let down beneath Isengard. As for Saruman's experiments, yes, we don't know exactly. So his Uruk-hai, Treebeard sort of speculates where did these Uruk-hai come from? Are they some foul cross between orcs and humans? So it's entirely possible that that's what they were. We never get exactly to the bottom of it. Yeah, he might have taken some inspiration from that. I think for me, as much as anything else, that he probably took inspiration from mythologies of that. We have so many of these kind of composite, like manticores and sphinxes and all the rest of it, that are different animals jumbled together. That certainly seems to be the way that he's got a lot of inspiration from, and a lot of those creatures exist in his world as well. So that does seem to be where he's got a lot of the inspiration from. But never put it past George R. R. Martin to take inspiration from Lord of the Rings. If you ever read any interviews with him, he's not asked about it, but he always talks about Tolkien. Every single interview, he talks about Tolkien. Reflective Rambling, hi there, and thank you again. You're doing what you always do, which I hugely appreciate, which is picking up on questions from other people in the chat. As I say, they go by so quickly, I often miss some of them. Although just Joe Magician reminds me of Chernobyl. Exactly, that's the feel I get as well about Old Valyria. But Paladin Pony is the question that Reflective Rambling you picked up on, saying, do you think Volantis has more Valyrian artifacts and knowledge than they let on? And could we see some of these things when Dany goes there? Possibly, but the reason why I'm slightly skeptical is that they tried early on, after they consider themselves, the first daughter of Valyria. They think they're the heirs of the Valyrian freehold, and they tried to just restart the empire, but with them being the capital instead, and it didn't go well. They didn't succeed. They gained a few of the places like Selhoris up the River Rhine, so an area around them, but the other three cities, no, they didn't. They captured a couple, but then lost them in the end. I suspect if they had any hugely powerful things from Old Valyria that they knew how to use, they would have used them then. So I don't think that there's not like some magic Valyrian weapon which will shoot dragons out of the sky or something like that. I don't think that we're going to see that. They may well have lots of ancient artifacts. It wouldn't surprise me. We know about the Valyrian steel swords in Westeros, for example. Surely there must be lots more in Essos that we just haven't been reading about. So it wouldn't surprise me if they have a lot of that, but probably not any hugely powerful things that they've just never told anyone about, because they would have used them already. And another question from James Sledge saying, what would you have liked to have seen explored in a TV show set in Old Valyria before the Doom? The possibilities are just so promising. I think I'd love to hear you pontificate a bit. I love pontificating. Pontificate a bit about your thoughts on the matter. Thank you for all you do. Well, you're very welcome. This was an idea at one point. We've been through a few iterations of these potential spin-offs from Game of Thrones. This was an idea that we were told that they were thinking about at some point, was Valyria pre-Doom. Now, I would have loved it. I'll be honest, I'm sure I will love so many of these possible ideas that they've got for possible spin-offs. So it's not a matter of wanting one and not the others. I'll have them all. Thank you. But what would I have liked in that? I would just want to know a bit about the culture and the politics and things like that, because there is so much obvious basic stuff we simply do not know about. What are the other Valyrian families? We know about the Targaryens, but they were just one of 40. Who were the other dragon riding families? How did it work? What was the actual social structure? Because we have other families like the Velaryons, who are Valyrian, but they were presumably a notch down. They weren't dragon riders. How did that work? What about the religion? We're not ever really told. The Valyrian religion, the Valyrian gods, they're sort of mentioned in passing a few times, that they're still worshipped within the black walls of Volantis, but we're not really told what the Valyrian gods are. Dany certainly seems to not be particularly worshipping Valyrian gods, so the Targaryens definitely didn't seem to be worshipping them. Does this mean that they just weren't religious people, or was it just an a thing you might decide to do or might not. We don't know. So I would have loved something to do with the politics of how that all worked. Wars of conquest, I could probably have passed on, but actually discovering what it was like and how do you, and we'll get a bit of this, I suspect, in House of the Dragon. If you have got the fantasy equivalent of nuclear weapons in dragons, how do you actually operate that? Do you live in this constant state of mutually assured destruction where you know that actually the dragons can't really fight each other? Or were there fights between the dragons in old Valyria? I don't know. We just haven't been told. We haven't got the information. Cloaked One, thank you for the super chat, saying Cloaked 2 just glanced at the stream on my phone and wanted to say that she liked your haircut. Well, thank you very much. It was just a couple of days ago, but thank you. I appreciate that. As I say, I suspect that the Hobbit locks will return in the winter, but as the sun's been out for the last few days, I've been very happy to have the shorter hair. But thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Now, question from Lily Mellon saying, "Hey Robert, hope you're well. Would you talk a bit about the Stone Men? I was wondering whether they attacked people to infect or protect, or if it's a desperation for supplies, etc. I guess I'm wondering if there's any logic to it left, or indeed any humanity left. Alternatively, I'd be really interested in you talking about how they stopped Shireen's Greyscale. I can't remember if there was any information surrounding this. Okay, so this is this may sound like a bit of a digression, but actually this I think there's a big clear link here, because the Greyscale, the Stone Men, this comes from the Garen's curse, Prince Garen. This was the last big war, the Roynish, the Roynar, against the Valyrians, and this was effectively, it was a curse on the enemies, on the Valyrians themselves. So we do have this Greyscale does seem to affect Valyrians in a way that a lot of diseases don't do so much. But that's a little bit of an aside. In terms of the Stone Men themselves, what unfortunately we're missing is the legendary chapter that George R.R. Martin wrote and has put in a drawer somewhere, set in Sorrows with Tyrion. And he says he wrote it and then he decided to go a different direction with the character. The clear implication is that he met the Shrouded Lord. He went down a lot more magical path than Tyrion has been going in the books. We would definitely have learned a whole lot more about the Stone Men. George R. R. Martin has basically said, no, that's now locked in a drawer until I die. Maybe somebody will drag it out and publish it afterwards, but I'm not going to do that because it's not where I've taken my story. But so we just have other people's views on it. In terms of the Stone Men are people who've got Greyscale, and it has developed to such a point that they're almost statues. We get these kind of descriptions of them kind of shambling around. They're still human, but it's not just the outside of their body that's turned to stone, their insides are as well. So everything's just sort of slowing down. Now, in terms of supplies, I think it's 3 times a year from Volantis. They ship supplies up to there. It's a curious arrangement. So they anyone who's got Greyscale, then they put them on this boat and then they take them up there. Basically, this is just like the retirement home for people with Greyscale, and the way that they kind of assuage any guilt that they may have is by putting loads of supplies here on this boat, and they sort of send it all off up there. So supplies do get there, but the implications are that might not be enough for the people who are living there, the Stone Men who are living there. And so, yes, it may well be that they attack people in order to get more supplies, or just, well, I'm going to go off on a slightly tinfoily digression in just one moment, or just because they are less than human now is probably the way to say it, more stone, and so that any kind of feelings of compassion they had maybe slightly dampened down. The slight digression is that there is a lot of magical stuff that does happen. George R. R. Martin, in that chapter that we do have with Tyrion, including what some people have talked about as the time-traveling boat. Now, what happens is that they're going on this boat down through the river, and then they pass by this big bridge, and then they appear to pass by it again, and then the stone men attack them. And the question is, so what happened there? Now, I don't think that's time travel, personally. I think what it is that we're told that there's lots of strange eddies and movements of water there, and this whole thing was water magic. So there is water magic going on there, and I suspect it was the Shrouded Lord or whoever moved the boat around so that they could come past, because having seen what was going on there, then decided it should be attacked. Why should it be attacked? Because in that period, that's when we get the effective revelation that, hey, we've got a Targaryen, Aegon Targaryen, on board here, a Valyrian. And that's the point. The ancient enemies of Prince Garin, and so that was what was going on there. It was being brought back because they think, it's a Valyrian. So a bit of digression going on there, but hopefully you found that useful. Sydney Rose saying, hello, Robert and Dashing Dan. Greetings from the swamplands of Florida. We had a 9-foot alligator sunbathing in the yard earlier this morning, which my brain cannot quite compute. So I'm going to move on. 9-foot alligator. And it got me thinking about the alchemy surrounding the creatures of Old Valyria. Could you expand on the alchemy that potentially gave us dragons, and how this obsession played a role in the Doom of Valyria? Also, for all of their conquesting, it's interesting how the Valyrians did not come across more sentient creatures like the children or the deep ones. Well, in terms of the interplay between what you call the alchemy or the gene splicing leading with dragons and how the role it played, they were delving deeper and deeper underground and doing more and more experiments, and they were driving their slaves horrifically. And it was, from what and I won't get into all of the Doom of Valyria stuff now, we can do that in a bit, but it was the slaves, from what we're told by the Faceless Men, that was the point at which the masters received their doom, as they effectively called it. So it was that punishing the slaves, pushing them deeper and further down, that caused the creation of the Faceless Men, and that eventually led to the doom. In terms of how the Valyrians did not come across more sentient creatures like the children or the deep ones, well, I mentioned already about the children of the forest. I suspect they did meet them. As for the deep ones are just, these are things that are mentioned in the sort of the outside of this story. I don't think they're going to be central. They're very much based on this Lovecraftian, H.P. Lovecraftian kind of feel of horrendous ancient creatures that are beyond our imagination and understanding, beyond even our laws of the universe, that were here before us. And now they're sunken deep into the earth, and maybe Cthulhu-like they could be raised once more. That is the kind of the feel of the deep ones. So they are gone. So that's why the Valyrians didn't meet them, because they have disappeared from this world, hopefully forever. It would be a terrible thing to wake them. They have disappeared from this world, and that's why the Valyrians didn't meet them. Reflective rambling, just saying Greyscale ostracizing equals leprosy colonies. Yeah, that's definitely the kind of the feel that we've got going on here. Question, I think I totally missed Lily Mellon. You were also asking about Shireen, which I should probably just quickly pick up on. What caused her Greyscale to stop? So she had Greyscale as a child, as a younger child. Stannis hired people from all over the world, maesters, magic users, all the rest of it, to do absolutely everything we're told. It did not work, but then the Greyscale just stopped of its own course. Maybe something was done by those people, maybe it was just stopped of its own course. So that's what we're told. When Jon Snow is talking to Val much later up on the wall, then she is horrified by this. She's horrified by Shireen, saying it doesn't just stop. It might go into, and I don't think she uses the word into remission, but that's the feel. It might just pause, but it will return. So that is what we've got hanging over us here with Shireen, is the idea that it did pause, but it may well come back. And if it does, that's going to add an extra layer to what is going to be happening with Shireen at the wall. She will be burned by Melisandre. As we saw on the show, we've already had confirmation that burning will happen. But it's not just going to be her, I suspect. Val also thinks that Shireen should be killed, and Val has a lot of influence there with the wildlings. So it's not going to just be Melisandre on her own with Shireen's parents sort of saying, okay, go on. This is going to be a lot more nuanced than that. There are going to be other people who want Shireen dead for other reasons because of the Greyscale. JR, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, in Game of Thrones, Tyrion is reading Engines of War. Do you think George is setting up the idea that Tyrion has knowledge of Valyrian weapons that can kill dragons? Well, Tyrion does a lot of reading, obviously, and it's teeing up a lot of different things. One of the most interesting things, I'll come back to Engines of War just 1 second. One of the most interesting things is that he is asked to write a book. When he's on the Shine Maid, going down the River Rhine, he's asked to write a book about dragons based on all of the things that he's read, and that presumably ends up with young Griff, and that will then be the preeminent bit of knowledge about dragons in the world. That will definitely become useful, and will perhaps give young Griff Aegon a feeling that he understands how dragons work when he does come into contact with Dany's dragons when they arrive. In terms of Engines of War, is this, which is the name of a book that Tyrion's reading, does this imply that Tyrion's going to understand some Valyrian ways of killing dragons? I think the feel I get from that is more this kind of Leonardo da Vinci. If you've ever seen any of his drawings of war machines, they're, as you would expect, wonderfully drawn, but horrific war machines. That's the kind of feel I get. And when we get, as we had on the show, you get the huge kind of ballista things that shoot dragons out of the sky. That will definitely be something which is going to be entertained, or there will be people trying to shoot dragons out of the sky with huge ballistas in the books. For me, the fact that Tyrion's reading it is just teeing up the fact that people have recorded this. And if you go back through Fire and Blood, you see that what are the ways that dragons die? Well, the main way that dragons die is they just kill each other. Another one is natural-ish causes, but for humans to kill them, it seems to be getting lucky shots from the ground. That seems to be the way that you kill them. So, yes, expect to see war machines coming up, probably in A Dream of Spring, I should have thought. Question from, I think that's roughly caught up on the chat. Kelly Johnson saying, where was the Ghiscari magic in the Valyrian Wars? We don't know huge amounts about the Valyrian Wars, honestly, Kelly. Ghiscari magic is not a thing that we've got huge amounts of information on either, but the impression that we get from the few records that we have got is that anything that was there is overrun by dragons, and the reason why the Valyrians didn't just quash them to start with was as much the fact that they were still developing that bond with dragons over time. Andrew Kay saying, yeah, I think it depends on the age. The younger dragons with less formed scales seem vulnerable to less perfect shots. I think that's entirely possible, but even well-established dragons, older dragons, can be shot down with a lucky hit. And just a last thought on Shireen. Tyrion does, he remembers that there are, when he's thinking about Greyscale, having gone through and fallen into the water himself, he remembers once being told that there were 3 ways to cure Greyscale: axe, sword, or cleaver. You just have to chop off the affected part of the body. Right, let's go to a question from Juliet O'Connor, saying, hi Robert, question about the Valyrians and their bonds to dragons. Do you believe that Valyrian DNA is required in order to bond with a dragon? Nettles, Hewhammer, and other dragon seeds seem to have implied Valyrian heritage, but it doesn't seem totally clear that it was necessary to bond to their dragons. So the dragon seeds, this was in the Dance of the Dragons, when the blacks had too many dragons, basically, not enough dragon riders, and so they said, okay, anyone who thinks they've got some Valyrian heritage. The dragon seeds were effectively the children, illegitimate children born on Dragonstone mainly, of the Targaryens, and some of the people who live in the villages of Dragonstone. So anyone who thinks that they might want to be able to try to ride a dragon can have a go, and 4 people succeeded. Now, the implication was that all of them had some Valyrian ancestry. So is that necessary? Well, we don't know, but it seems to be, with one important caveat that I'm going to do in just a moment, it seems to be necessary but not sufficient. So you do seem to, if you wish to bond with the dragon in the kind of the Valyrian way, then you do need to have that some kind of Valyrian heritage to you. But the significant caveat is the fact that even Dany is probably only maximum, if you look at her family tree, about 1/8 Valyrian. She's sort of held up as the poster girl for being a Targaryen and Valyrian heritage and all the rest of it. She's not as Valyrian as you might think she is. So it's not that you, if you're wanting to bond with a dragon, ride a dragon, it's not that you have to be pure blood, so to speak. But it does seem that you do have to have some kind of Valyrian heritage to you. Again, all of this is speculative. We don't have all of the Valyrian records were destroyed. So this is why all of these things we don't know huge amounts about. Maybe they did write down all of this, but all of it in Old Valyria was destroyed. The only place we might have this information is down in Old Town, because the Maesters did regularly travel over there trying to get knowledge. Question from Diego Godoy saying, hola, Robert, hola. How big and old was Valyria as a city or empire? Was it the oldest or biggest of Essos? Well, it wasn't the oldest. So this is sort of to pull together a few of the things I've said in answer to previous questions. It wasn't the oldest. You get things like the Great Empire of the Dawn. Similarly, the Dothraki have got their legends that seem to suggest that they came from the earliest of times as well. Then you get places like the old things like the old Empire of Gis. Then came the Valyrians. So it wasn't the oldest, it wasn't even the next to oldest. It was, in the grand scheme of things, relatively recent. So it was certainly since the Long Night, seems to be the implication. Other stuff was going on well before them. Was it the biggest? Well, I've already talked about the size and scale of it, but it didn't ever conquer or have control of all of Essos, as far as we're aware, nor did they seem to want to. They kept relatively small, 40 families, and the 40 families seemed to stay mostly in Valyria, so they seem not to actually have had an interest in sort of going out and around all around the rest of the place. So their influence did spread far and wide, but it wasn't over all of Essos. As for Valyria, the city, again, we don't know exactly. It was almost certainly large, very, very large. But because there are some of the cities which remain like Mantaris is a large place, and that was just like a suburb, a couple of weeks away or something like that. So we don't have exact dimensions, but we get told them having topless towers, which sound like skyscrapers that sort of went up. They might have been literally topless so that dragons could land on the top of them, or maybe it was just that you couldn't see the top of them because they were so high, or maybe a bit of both. But it seems to be a city of splendors and wonders, and yes, definitely large. Question from Sir Bobbert Ross saying, hello, Robert. Hang on, I've just lost the question again. Hello, Robert. If dragons allegedly lived all over Westeros, Essos, and Sothorios in the past, which George R. R. Martin has said, how did the Valyrians end up as the last civilization with dragons? Now, this is fascinating. It is definitely a gap that George R. R. Martin has left us with between the fact that dragons once were over the entire planet and the fact that they were all being controlled by the Valyrians. And when I say all, there's the entire possibility off to the east of Essos into the Shadowlands. That certainly seems to be where dragons probably initially came from. So maybe there's some more over there. We do not know. But my best understanding is that when the Valyrians got their ability to bond with dragons, that's the point at which they sort of gained a monopoly over the dragons in the world. They didn't want other people having the dragons. They were the only people with dragons. So that was what it was. And so once they'd got all of the dragons or got control of all of the dragons, that from then on, when the Valyrian dragons went, the dragons as a whole went. So that was roughly how it is. But George R. R. Martin has left it vague. He has left it the possibility that he's going to give us a huge info dump about stuff in the past, about what happened with all the dragons. The Jack of Hearts, thank you very much for I don't know if that's there was a super chat or something. I didn't see a question attached to it. Do let one of the moderators know. Andrew Kay saying the Great Empire of the Dawn is probably the OG Dragon Rider civilization. It's possible, but I personally still hold with I say possible / probable. I personally hold with the fact that the dragon bonding was a Valyrian thing that came well after the Great Empire of the Dawn. Roman Lakovets saying, why didn't anyone in Valyria except Daenerys the Dreamer have any premonitions about the Doom? They seem to have. There was this legend that the downfall of Valyria would come from Lannister gold. So there was definitely that, and it's entirely possible that others also had visions. We just do not hear about them because they were ignored. Because let's face it, it was a big move from the Targaryens to up sticks from where they were. Moved the entire family, all of their possessions, hundreds and hundreds of miles away from their culture, to an island in the middle of the sea that they didn't know anyone. This was huge. It's entirely possible other people had similar visions and were just ignored, Cassandra-like. Okay, question from Julia Erickson. The description of what happened to Princess Arya that we were talking about before when she came back from Valyria is very reminiscent of a few other scenes in the books. Just before the creepy worms with faces burst out through her skin, it is written that her flesh grew darker and darker and then began to crack, and that her lips were cracked and bleeding. This description is similar to the description of the Hornblower at the King's Moot, with Euron's Dragonbinder saying, the cheeks of the tattooed man were so puffed out they looked about to burst, and the muscles in his chest twitched. The priest saw blood and blisters upon the lips of the man. His lungs were charred and as black as soot. When Daenerys has her Wake the Dragon dream, George R. R. Martin writes, a great knife of pain ripped down her back, and she felt her skin tear open and smelled the stench of burning blood and saw the shadow of wings. What's your take on the similarities? Could George R. R. Martin be telling us about the creation of dragons here? I don't think he's telling us about the creation of dragons in there specifically. He's telling us about Valyrian magic, the fire and blood magic. That's what seems to, and the heat is the thing which seems to be there. Dany's sort of Awake the Dragon. This is early on in Dany's either first or second chapter that we have of Daenerys, and she has this dragon dream, and basically Drogon seems to be calling her. So that, I think, is just waking up the dragon within her, which is different to what Viserys had always been talking about, what waking the dragon was about. In terms of the link between Arya Targaryen and the man who was blowing the Hellhorn, Dragonbinder, I think this goes to show that Targaryens are different. So one of the things that we concentrate a lot, understandably, on the horrific nature of what happened with Arya Targaryen. But the fact of the matter is, she should have been dead. She had these burning, hot, writhing, I mean, it's horrible, so turn off the audio for a moment if you want to, burning hot, writhing worms with faces crawling in and around her body. Some of them were really quite large. She should have been dead. She wasn't. She was still alive when she got back to King's Landing. And the only reason why she could still be alive is because she was Valyrian, and the heat was something that she could cope with. So that is what the first thing which is important, which means that the Dragonbinder releases heat within, through the magic, releases heat within the person who's blowing it. Now, what's the link? It's possible, we do not know, but it's possible that means that only Valyrians can blow those hellhorns and survive, because they can survive with the heat inside to them in a way that other humans cannot. That's possibly what we're being shown there. Or alternatively, it's just showing us this is how Valyrian magic works, fire and blood. It's possible. But I like the idea that perhaps this is it can only be blown by somebody who can cope with the excess heat, and we know that Valyrians do. They're not resistant to heat or immune to heat, but they are resistant to it to a reasonably high degree. Dany takes very scaldingly hot baths and is absolutely fine. So there is a possibility that that is what is going on there. So Victarion's arms, this sweet Melissa just picking up. Victarion's arm crackled like pork, which is mentioned in Fire and Blood. Again, yes, so that was the same language usage for area. Her arm was described as being similar to that. So this is the idea that you get. And Victarion is the person who theoretically, he probably won't personally himself do it, theoretically will be blowing the horn. So again, the link is being made between those two things. It's George R. R. Martin. It's one of these things where we're only going to be able to see, looking back, whether that was foreshadowing or just a generic, this is how Valyrian magic works. Carl Karsnark in the chat saying, check out the Disputed Lands channel for a great Origins of Dragons and Wyverns videos. Absolutely. I've said it before, I will say it again, and I know that if you're watching this live, you can't get the links working, but look for the Disputed Lands, who's got a couple of excellent videos there about a lot of these things we're talking about right now, about the Valyrian gene splicing, the fact that they're part dragon and all the rest of it. Do go and have a look at that. Yule Elson, thank you so much for the super sticker of I don't know, rhino in an office chair. I'm not entirely sure, but thank you. I like that one. That was a good little super sticker. Targaryen Time Lord, which is a fantastic name, saying, hi Robert, first time patron here, welcome. I'm delighted that you're making use of the patron benefit of getting priority questions here for the live streams. I adore your content, it helps fill the void that is the wait for the winds of winter. Thank you. My question is, do you believe Valyria could be a descendant of the great Empire of the Dawn? They both have the lost city of Atlantis vibe, though the Empire of the Dawn is much older. Anytime large kingdoms would be conquered in the world, it seems to involve dragon lords. And Whitney also asks, hi Robert and welcome back. I was hoping you could discuss the link between the Valyrians and the great Empire of the Dawn. Could the Dawn Empire have been ancestors to the Valyrians? Yes, so this has come up a few times, and it's something I know that a lot of people do get fascinated by. The great Empire of the Dawn was a huge empire. It was a very long time ago. It has links in with the first long night. It's quite possibly linked across to Asshai that I've already talked about, where a lot of magic and knowledge of dragons comes from. It's not a coincidence that when, for example, Aegon V is hunting for knowledge of how to hatch dragons, he tries to get knowledge from Asshai, that Asshai seems to have knowledge of this and was clearly a huge, massive city at some point in its own right. And we get told that there may well be dragons in the Shadowlands beyond Asshai. The Great Empire of the Dawn seems to have extended out across all of that kind of area. The hints are all there, added to which we also get the links between the sort of the architect. We already talked about the base of the high tower and how that seems to be a similar sort of stone to the type that we get on, say, the Five Forts, which are these massive constructions right at the far, the sort of the eastern end. It would have been part of the great Empire of the Dawn. Nobody really knows what they're there for, but presumably guarding for anything coming from the east. There's also hints to do with colouring. There are some people like the House Dane who have got very Valyrian colouring, but George R. R. Martin has been very clear that they're not Valyrians, and it's just two different paths, similar colouring. But could these two paths of similar colouring have both come from the same place? Perhaps the Great Empire of the Dawn. So do I think that the Great Empire of the Dawn could have been, and I sort of name checked this a few times, different questions, so I just to be clear, the Great Empire of the Dawn, there were dragons around. They had magic. I'm absolutely sure of it. The dragons at the time were passing over the entire world. I do not think at that time that they had developed what is actually effectively magical technology in the way that the Valyrians did much later on. But the Valyrians seem to have inherited a lot from them. They didn't come directly from there. There was empires in between, but they seem to have captured some of what was there in the Great Empire of the Dawn and then turned this into the defining feature of their empire. The Valyrians were all about fire and blood and dragons. That wasn't the defining feature of the Great Empire of the Dawn, but the Valyrians took one aspect from it. So that's my personal take. George R. R. Martin, as I said before, has couched the Great Empire of the Dawn in legendary language. We're not supposed to take it literally. The things that we read about it, we're not supposed to take as having actually happened in that way. So we're just supposed to take the themes that come across. And that seems to be where this comes from. Valyrian Empire is a successor to the Great Empire of the Dawn, but it's not just a straight line between the two. In the same way, perhaps, I don't know whether this analogy will work, but in the same way, perhaps, that Rome, the Roman Empire, was a successor empire to the Greek Empire. There was more crossover there, of course, but they were a successor empire. They took a lot of the knowledge, but then had a different culture. Ryan Larkin, thank you for very much for the super sticker of microphone. That one I could understand. Hippo on the chair was fantastic, but it took me a moment to work out what it was. Cloaked One, thank you so much. Picking up a question for somebody else, saying for Adam Cresswell. First live stream I've been able to catch in months and months. Appreciate you and all the mods for your great work. This is helping us Ontario Canadians get through another lockdown. Coach One, thank you. Adam Cresswell, thank you very much. I don't know the situation in Canada, but it does strike. I think it's getting worse there. You have my very best wishes. Say things in this country at the moment, who knows how they'll be at some point, but at the moment things are slowly easing up. Got a haircut, got to the gym, and I'm feeling good. But I'm glad that I am providing some solace in dark times over there in Ontario. And just before that, Andrew Kay saying Valyrians seem to have taken it to the next level, mostly in a bad way, but seems they got the foundations of the practices from somewhere. Yeah, I think I waffled a long way, but that I think is quite a succinct way of saying it. They got the foundations of their practices from the Great Empire of the Dawn, probably. Catherine Furseth saying it is said that all magic in Valyria was based on blood and fire. The fire mages seem central both in controlling the 14 fires and in performing other forms of magic. Can you please talk a little about the nature of Valyrian magic, including your thoughts on the making of Valyrian steel, and also how Valyrian fire magic fits in with the other old forms of magic in Essos? Okay, so magic, yes. So this is fire and blood is how Valyrian magic seems to work. I think in terms of Valyrian steel, sorry, I was just umming and ahhing because you asked a few different things. I was trying to work out which way to come into it. In terms of Valyrian steel, we do not know. What we know is this is like normal steel, but stuff done to it. Now, the stuff done to it is spells. We're told that Tobbo Mott in King's Landing, who comes from Qohor, where they still have the secrets of these things, he knows the spells, is what we're told. So this is a magical process that is gone through the creation of Valyrian steel. Now, what needs to be added to it? Well, you can add in colors and all the rest of it. That seems to be mostly about just making it look pretty, but something is done to the steel. It makes it lighter, it makes it tougher, it makes it long lasting, it makes it sharper. What is it? There's another element in there. I still like this tinfoil idea that it might be dragon glass, because we're told about all the colors that dragon glass comes in. It's not just the black, it comes in lots of different colors. I like that idea. Ties in with how Valyrian steel might well be is as effective against the others as dragon glass is, because it's made from the same thing. So that all works for me. So in terms of magic as a whole, I think the Valyrian magic works very similarly to other types of magic. All magic within George R. R. Martin's world seems to have a matter of intentionality and a matter of sacrifice. Both of those things seem to be there no matter what. You have to be trying to do that. Magic just doesn't randomly happen. You have to be trying to do the magic, and there has to be some sort of cost associated with it. The greatest way of seeing this is the magic that happens with Dany and the hatching of the dragon eggs. Now, it might look from the outside as if this was just like a random thing that happened. She meant to do that. She understood what was happening. This wasn't a surprise. When the dragon eggs hatched, it involved fire, it involved sacrifice. There were Khal Drogo's body was there, Mirri Maz Duur's body was there, Rhaego, her stillborn son, had died. Also, Khal Drogo's horse had just been sacrificed. There were sacrifices around that. At the same time, fire, sacrifice, intentionality, the red comet overhead, all the timing was perfect and right. So that was the set of ingredients that were required in order to make the magic happen. And that is the same for other types of magic. At some point, I am going to do my grand theory of magic in A Song of Ice and Fire, but this works across all the other kinds of magic. There's the intentionality, there's the sacrifice. These things are there across the piece. And again, the only big example I can see that seems to go against this is Beric Dondarrion's first resurrection. That seems to defy most theories, but is very much not a matter of great focus and interest in the community. I wish it were more so. Anyway, complete digression. So I think it works the same way as all the other kinds of magic. It's not a special kind of magic. Question from Mara Lee saying, a question I have is in Old Valyria, the Valyrian freehold was essentially an oligarchy run by the wealthy noble families. There was no single emperor or king. Why? What happened to change the political structure when Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives came to Westeros? The political system changed from an oligarchy-style system with no king to a political system where now Aegon the Conqueror becomes king of the Seven Kingdoms. Why? Excellent question. I think this is just a matter of context and time. As we pointed out, the Targaryens weren't one of the most powerful. Yes, they were one of the 40, but one of the weaker families in Valyria. And then Valyria had gone. They were the only ones left, and they thought of themselves as different. as special. They were a race apart. They didn't have to obey the same rules as everyone else. They came up with this doctrine of exceptionalism about how the Targaryens are different and better to the people than the people in Westeros. And so they felt, by the time of Aegon the Conqueror at least, that they had this, they were better. They were a higher race, as it were. Then you get the context of that's what there was in Westeros. They didn't have this kind of oligarchy feel. Kings ruled. There were 7 kingdoms, and so maybe Aegon could have just captured one kingdom, but why not make the whole be king of the whole lot? If he was going to go there, which he evidently decided he wanted to, then yes, the local context was to be king, and that fit with their mindset that they were different and better and more special than everyone else. So that, I think, is the change. When you have 40 families who all believe that they are part of this, they're ruling and better than everyone else, and then 39 of them go, the last remaining family will definitely think they're better than everyone else. Reflective Rambling saying mod love. Absolutely. If you are watching this live and in the chat, then you will have been spotting the wonderful work from my moderators. Carl Carsenark, Andrew Kay, Kraken Tacos was around earlier, as well as Chrissy of Oldstones, who are wonderful people. So if you are watching this live, could you please, Chrissy's there still as well. Great. Could you please show some love for the moderators? They are excellent. Melissa Gill saying, hi Robert, glad to have my favorite content creator back. Thank you. I'm glad to be back. I have a question about the Doom of Valyria. What do we know about the ecological fallout from the eruption itself? It seems like 14 huge volcanoes erupting would have some sort of impact on global temperatures. Would this just be seen as another long winter? Yes, it might have been. It's an interesting question, because it's not we're told of like the ash clouds and all the rest of it. There were definite earthquakes, there were tidal waves that raced across Slavers Bay. The whole peninsula was gone. I talked briefly about Mantaris. There seems to have been some sort of equivalent of fallout there, which means that the magical fallout of what it was made that city, the people who lived there, become deformed for generations afterwards. There was a lot of long-term ecological and environmental impacts from this. So it's definitely there. What we don't see is whether or not this kind of rejigged things around and sort of created an early winter or anything like that. We don't get any hints about that, but it's entirely possible that this will have, well, it's definite that it affected the ecosystems around there and around most of Planetos by a sort of knock-on effect. Reflective Rambling, thank you so much. Saying, if everything has a price, one Valyria and dragon origin involves Asshai. Could Asshai jealousy have led to the doom with the death of the city because of the cost? Gonna throw you off my trend once in a while. Right, so could Asshai jealousy have led to the doom? It could, but I don't think so. The thing about Asshai is, and I'll come at this in 2 directions. The first is the thing about Asshai, and secondly is what I think happened with the Doom. The thing about Asshai is it's not a king or anything like that that is particularly jealous. They just are there. They're seemingly happy to be left alone doing their thing. It's a massive city, so everyone who's living there has these like mansions, and it's they're happy. There are no rules. All kinds of magic is practiced there. Why would they be jealous of Valyria? There's no suggestion that they were, only if Valyria was taking over a role that they wanted. Now, if Asshai had done the Doom of Valyria because Valyria were doing something that the Asshai wanted, why did Asshai not then step into the breach straight afterwards and take control themselves? They didn't, which seems to imply to me that that wasn't what was going on. So what was going on? Well, I did a video on this ages ago, so if you want the longer version of this, then go there. But we've got a lot of moving pieces. We've got the faceless men claim credit for it. We've got the likelihood that to Arya, we've got the likelihood that this was done by murdering, because it just seems to be what happened was the wizards, the fire wizards who were controlling the volcanoes, were assassinated, and that meant the volcanoes erupted because they'd been held back all this time by the fire wizards, and that was the Doom of Valyria. So that seems to have been what happened. So the question is, who hired the faceless men to do it? Now, some people say, oh, this was the faceless men, they're from Braavos, they hate the slavers and all the rest of it, but that doesn't quite seem to work when you get into understanding how the faceless men operate, because Arya, when questioning the kindly man about the story that she's told about the start of it, the faceless men started by murdering other slaves. It was one first person who then murdered other slaves to give them freedom from these horrendous conditions that they were. And Arya said, that doesn't seem fair. Why is it that the slaves are being killed and not the slave masters? And then the answer is that death is nothing to do with fairness. We just, people die, all men must die. But the slave masters, they got what they deserved later, was basically the gist of that. So that does not imply, or that suggests strongly that this was not just the faceless men wanting to kill them because they think that they deserved death. They think everybody should. Somebody hired them in order to do that. Now, this then ties in with this Lannister gold thing, because it would obviously cost a lot of money to do this. Is there any way that this Lannister gold might have paid for this to do, and therefore fulfill the prophecy that it was the Lannister gold that paid it? Well, did the Lannisters want to destroy Valyria? There's no particular hint of it. What was happening with the Lannisters, though, was that they desperately wanted a Valyrian steel sword. And because there was this legend, this prophecy, that Lannister gold was going to cause the end of the Valyrians, none of the Valyrians would take the money. They would not make a Valyrian steel sword for the Lannisters. So where the Lannisters got a sword, they did get a sword. Where did they get this sword from? They paid a huge amount of money for this one Valyrian steel sword. Who knew how to do it? Well, maybe they found some rogue person in Qohor or something like that. That's possible. But who else would have the knowledge of Valyrian steel? The Maesters. So, who are just around the corner from them, after all, the Lannisters. So my best guess is that that's where the Lannisters bought their sword from. The Maesters learned the secrets of Valyrian steel. We know that they know how to reforge it and all the rest of it because they make the Valyrian steel links. That's what they do. So they've got the knowledge. The Lannisters pay them huge amounts of money. What do the Maesters do with this huge amount of money? Well, we know that the Maesters do not like dragons. We know that the Maesters do not like magic. If it was in their power, surely it's possible that they could want to get rid of Valyria. So, tying all this together, what seems to have happened is, in my mind anyway, and as I say, there are many extra bits to this. Go check out the video if you're interested. The Lannisters couldn't get a sword made for them by the Valyrians because there was a legend that the Lannister gold would cause the downfall. So they bought it off of the maesters. The maesters suddenly had huge amounts of money. What do the maesters do with the huge amounts of money? But they want to cause the downfall of the dragons because they do not want. So they use the Lannister gold to pay the faceless men who murder the fire mages, thus causing the explosion and the Doom of Valyria. That's my personal theory. Carl Castmark saying, I love how Robert can matter-of-factly say the fire wizards who controlled the volcanoes and none of us bat an eyelash. Yeah, absolutely. This is magical world. Everything in George R. R. Martin's magical world is bigger, better, and more impressive. Kyle Netherwood said, is there a new Valyria? Volantis tried to claim the crown of being New Valyria, but nobody else was really having it. Let's go to question from Brennan Barnes saying, welcome back, thank you. My question concerns the remnants that still linger on of old Valyria in Westeros and Essos in the current time of A Song of Ice and Fire. Could you briefly touch on the various Westerosi houses, free cities, etc., that currently boast ties to old Valyria? Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a lot, is the short version of this. Volantis, I've already mentioned, those of the old blood in Volantis, the people within the Black Walls of Volantis, they trace their heritage back to Valyria. They claim direct descent from Valyria. Then you get across the free cities, lots of people who have got some ancestry back to the Valyrians. We find lots, particularly in places like Lys, with the pleasure houses of Lys, lots of people with this blonde hair, blue, purple eyes going on. So all around lots of the free cities. Then you have over in Westeros, you have 3 families. You get the Targaryens, you get the Velaryons, and you get House Celtigar. Now, they all have got Valyrian heritage. But then you expand out beyond that and go, well, okay, that they didn't just marry each other. They intermarried with some other Westerosi houses, and then you can expand out as far as you like. But the main one probably to mention is House Baratheon, which did have a couple of times people marrying into it from the Targaryens. So there are quite a few of these houses who have got some bits of Valyrian blood going on, but when you head over to Essos, there's a lot. And this is why Aegon II, when he was wanting a bride for Rhaegar, he sent Steffon Baratheon over to Volantis to get a bride, because he thought that's where there will be Valyrians. And it is a mystery how Steffon Baratheon did not find any. Stan Belafoy saying, thanks for the great content. Thank you. What are your thoughts on the Valyrian diseases to which we were exposed in Fire and Blood, specifically Arya after returning to Dragonstone with Balerion? Okay, so the part of the Targaryen doctrine of exceptionalism is the fact that they don't get diseases. And so it was a shock when they did. So the thing I would mention first is Greyscale. The reason why it's worth noting particularly about Shireen is because the Baratheons obviously have got some Targaryen heritage going on, as I mentioned a moment ago. But there are others. There are other Valyrians or Targaryens who did get Greyscale. This seems to be something that they are partial to, and some did catch other diseases. The Targaryens were not immune to other diseases, but they seemed to be less likely to catch them, perhaps because they were part dragony, so human things didn't always impact on them. As for what happened with Arya, that was just something she picked up in Valyria. This was not a disease or anything. This was almost certainly what happened was that Balerion went there. Balerion was very old at the time, was just heading back home. He was born in Valyria. So he just headed back there, landed down somewhere, was attacked by various things. Arya was probably also, but they infected her in some way, got inside her skin, and then started growing there. So that seems to have been what's happening. It was is not a disease so much as an infection of an animal. In fact, it's like if you a particularly nasty version of a tapeworm. That's the kind of feel that we're getting here. At which point I have to say, because I say it every single time and I mean it every single time, patrons, thank you so much. I genuinely cannot devote the time and attention I do to this without your support. So thank you so much. That's why I give priority to questions from my patrons and other benefits for my patrons as well. If you are interested in supporting this channel, if you want to get access to some of the benefits for being a patron, then there's a link down in the description to my Patreon page. So thank you for that. Got a few more questions, about half a dozen or so more questions. Maester Mance is saying, I wonder if you could elaborate on why the site of Old Valyria remains so perilous to this day, especially if it was destroyed by volcanic eruptions. I had half a thought it might have been some sort of magical fire beings of the deep, linking to Tolkien and Lovecraft. They dug too deep. So yeah, this is I sort of touched on this one earlier, so hopefully Maester Mance, that's the that will cover this for you. But the things that survived were the things which thrive in heat, and therefore volcanic magma and volcanic eruptions would not affect them. So the things that are still there are horrific and love the heat, and that's partly probably why they haven't moved out beyond, because they need that heat. And when they seem to have died when subjected to ice by when Arya came back with them, they seem to have died when subjected to ice by Septon Bath, who was a very clever chap. Eric Ferg saying, if the seasons ever return to normal, does that help make Valyria more habitable? Theoretically, perhaps, but I think this was a magical eruption and the magical fallout. So I think that's that will just still linger, and it's not connected in with the seasons. The season shifting was a very different thing entirely. This is not what's going on there. Similarly, you say in the far north, yes. So I think the and I did a video on this. Why are the seasons out of joint? If you're interested in the detail of this, but it's very clear that the season, it's not just natural that the seasons are out of sync on Planetos. An event, a magical event. We get this was on the back page, the blurb for the very first edition of the very first book, A Game of Thrones. George R. R. Martin certainly approved it and probably wrote it. It says that a preternatural magical event caused the seasons to be out of sync. Now, that is the introduction to all of this. Almost certainly it is the creation of the others in whatever shape that takes in the books that cause the things to be out of whack. But the seasons when they are there seem to be normal-ish. Yes, they might get really bad winters and all the rest of it, but there's no reason to think once they move back that they won't be. It'll still be cold in the north. It'll still be warm in the south of Westeros. Arkman, do you think the creatures and mysteries that remain in Valyria will play a role in the story? Do you think there are untouched dragon eggs in Valyria that will hatch and end the story with dragons have returned to the world at large? I don't think that we're going to get many. I think George R. R. Martin likes having mysteries in his world, and I think that he thinks this adds to the world. Not everything has to be tied up and completely understood. We're not going to get answers to absolutely everything. That is the way that he wants his world to be. So I think that a lot of the mysteries of Old Valyria will remain mysteries of Old Valyria even once the last 2 books are written. But in terms of the sort of the second part of that, do I think there are dragon eggs still there? Do I think that they will hatch? I mean, there may well be dragon eggs still there. There was one. Euron claimed he had one, claimed he threw it away. So it's entirely possible that there are dragon eggs hidden out and around the world. Could they hatch? Possibly. I don't think in this. I think it would confuse this story for them to be hatched within this story. The question is, what does it happen at the end? And for it to happen, I think it would have to be in. If you imagine like the cinematic equivalent of like everything's finished and it's all good, and then the camera pans away and then it shows you, but look over here. A dragon egg is hatching. It's all going to happen again. That kind of feel. Might George R. R. Martin go that way? He might. But the point of this story is the twin threats of ice and fire, both of which could destroy the world, and both of which have to be pushed back in some way. He may show that they can't be completely eliminated, but I don't think the focus of all of this is that, hey, dragons are going to come back and rule the skies once more. That would be against the overall theme of what he's been writing. Carl Netherwood, Essos does have seasons. The entirety of Planetos has got seasons. Sorry if I confused anyone with that. Yes, so the entire world has got seasons. We only really hear about Westeros because most of the story is set on Westeros. But yes, the entire planet is sort of off balance in terms of seasons as well. Eric Fogg saying, how in the world can dragons be used in construction at all, let alone to construct huge Valyrian roads and buildings? So my George R. R. Martin doesn't tell us the detail of how dragons can be involved in construction, but it seems to be dragon fire that seems to be the issue here. It's not that, so the dragons aren't sort of coming up with claws and doing all sort of the fine details on buildings and all the rest of it. What seems to be happening is that they've got this stone that maybe they put some magic into, and then the dragon fire is what melts it and allows it to be molded into shape. That seems to be the feeling of what we've got going on there. Not everything is made by that the Valyrians had was made by dragonfire. This is just some big things. So it seems to be the dragonfire was used as a sort of how do you sort of soften it to, rather than having a forge to be making, softening the steel in order to bang it into shape and all the rest of it. You use dragonfire, extra big scale dragonfire, to be softening the material you're using for building, and then you're doing something with it there to be shaping it into the shape you want. That seems to be the feel we've got, but it doesn't seem to be an everyday occurrence. This seems to be quite a special and unique thing that they would occasionally do. And similarly, so the only example we have of recent history is when Balerion the Black Dread's fire is used apparently to be forging, if that's the right word, the Iron Throne. It was used to melt the metals together. He didn't arrange all of the swords in order to make it into a throne shape. There were other people doing that, but it was his fires that melted them, softened them, that allowed that work to be done. So that's the feel that George R. R. Martin is trying to get us to have. Lady Pushkins, is Valyria one of the most magical places in George R. R. Martin's world, or where do you think is? And Robert, would you ever consider going on Mastermind? Probably not. Mastermind is for the non-British people. Mastermind is a long-running TV quiz show with specialist subjects. They did have somebody on there. If you're interested in this, they did have somebody on there who did choose A Song of Ice and Fire as their specialist subject. So I suspect they wouldn't go and have A Song of Ice and Fire again, having had someone do it so recently. But thank you for thinking of me on that one. Is Valyria one of the most magical places? Yes, it is. Even though the magical has been blown up, as I say, the sort of the magical fallout is definitely still there. Is it the most magical? I mean, I don't know how you judge these things, but I would certainly say the Isle of Faces is an incredibly magical place. And you would probably say the Wall is quite a magical place. But Valyria is definitely right up there, along with those things, as sort of a hub of magic, as it were. Two more questions. So now is a good time for people to drop any questions in the chat. I'll try and pick up as much of them as I can. Lady Eternal saying, good time zone, Robert. Happy Earth Day. And to you. I hope you and Dan enjoyed your respite. Yet very much so. I was rewatching season 7 of the show, and there was an exchange between Cersei and Tychonostoris I found odd. He was trying to indirectly tell her that the Iron Bank didn't hold her blowing up the Great Sept against her, and at one point he mentioned that they know sometimes calamities are necessary for the greater good. I didn't think about it at the time, but do you think that that alludes to the idea it was the Faceless Men that caused the doom with the Iron Bank's backing? Maybe even to the old prophecy that Lannister gold would bring about Valyria's downfall. I can't remember that specific. I mean, I can remember the two of them talking. I can't remember that particular exchange. I actually, you say about rewatching season 7. I actually rewatched season 8 this last week for the first time properly. I watched a couple of episodes before, but the whole season properly for the first time in 2 years. It must have been. It holds up all right, actually. It holds up better than I thought it was going to. Having got past the shock and surprise and dislike of some aspects of it, once I knew the bits I wasn't going to like, if you just watch it as pure TV, it holds up better than you might think. Anyway, just my personal view. But was that a hint that it was the Faceless Men? Well, as I say, I think it was the Faceless Men who did it. The Iron Bank may well know that it was them who did it. But I think that there's, in terms of that, it really was the Iron Bank will lend to anyone as long as they think they can get their money back. And I think that was what the point was, to just show the character of the bank. And then you're saying, second question, as others have mentioned, there are many parallels between Valyria and Atlantis. There is little doubt that George R. R. Martin drew inspiration from the Atlantean myths when coming up with it. Those who have tried to find Atlantis in the real world either come up empty-handed or don't come back at all. Another parallel in the story. Do you think what story we have left will leave these disappearances as mysteries as they have remained in real life, or do you think George R. R. Martin has a surprise up his sleeve? I think that they will remain mysteries. I don't think that we're suddenly going to get and this is what happened to Garion, and this is what happened here, and all the rest of it. I think we're not even going to find out for sure that Euron went to Valyria himself. So I think he likes having mysteries. He enjoys this fact. He thinks that it makes the world bigger. And I tend to agree with him on this, actually. If everything were explained and tied down, then the world would be a very small and compact world. But he wants his to be a huge universe that has possibilities and links that don't always get explained. So no, I don't think he's got a particular surprise. I think he will have surprises. I should probably say this. He will have surprises for us in the Winds of Winter. Whenever it comes out, it's because of his writing style. There are certain things that we know will be in there because he's foreshadowed them, because they've been set up. We can see where everything's going. But his writing style is to follow stuff through, to garden, as he likes to call it, to allow characters to sort of explore things themselves and see what would happen. And that means that there will be surprises. He's had 10 years to be following these characters in other random directions, and his mind will have changed in that 10 years. So there will be things we're not expecting. Even those of us who've been obsessing over this for most of those 10 years, he will surprise us with some of the things that happen, and I'm really excited by that. Question from Chaos Ballerina saying, I saw it suggested that Euron warged into other humans to travel Valyria unscathed. Is there any indication he's a strong enough warg to do that? Okay, so I mean, that's a nice idea. That's how you could personally get around it. This certainly seems to be the way to get around the Hellhorn, is that he's not personally going to sound the Hellhorn. He's going to get other people to do it for him. So that certainly seems in his way. There's the idea that he might be a warg. For those, I'm not going to go through all of the logic here because that belongs in a Euron live stream, but he has been drinking heavily from the Shade of the Evening tree juice that he got from the Warlocks. That was the stuff that Dany drank from before going into the House of the Undying. That is giving him huge amounts of magical visions, and it may also have helped to sort of, in the same way when Bran had the weirwood paste, that kind of unlocked that magic within him, and perhaps this has done the same thing with Euron, who probably has the same potential within him. Are there any hints that he might be able to warg into humans? Well, we get the Dusky Woman, who is almost certainly, I think, spying for Euron, and Euron gave Victarion as a gift this woman to be a bed companion to him. I think that was the phrase he used. And Victarion is not the sharpest tool in the box, and just seemed to accept that, Euron just gave him a gift. But she seems to be spying on him, or I suspect that is Euron seeing things through her eyes in some way, warging into her. Now, could he therefore have done the same thing in Valyria? Yeah, absolutely, he could have done. We don't have any evidence of it, though, other than this is a possibility. So I like it. There are hints that he might be strong enough to do it, but we haven't got the evidence. Rob Dean, thank you so much for Super Chat, saying, just tuned in and I've already missed most of the stream. Time zones suck and all the rest of it. Yes, they do. And I keep on saying this, but I will at some point get back to doing live streams at times that are slightly more friendly for other parts of the world. So do keep an eye out for that. I will try my best to do that. Reflective Rambling, thank you again. You're picking up from somebody else. I love it. Austin Flowers this time, saying, are there any records of misshapen or stillborn Targaryens before Aegon's conquest? Not that I know of off the top of my head, but that there aren't many records of before Aegon's conquest, so we don't have much. Certainly don't have much from when they were in Valyria, if anything. And then when they were on Dragonstone before they invaded, it's covered just in a few pages. So I think probably they would have done. The logic implies the reason why there are these misshapen babies is because they've got the draconic blood within them, and sometimes that sort of spills over into the genetics of the child. So that makes sense that has not changed. So we should have seen that going all the way through Targaryen history and indeed to Valyrian history. Correction Unknown saying Elio Garcia versus Robert in a knowledge of who wins Elio every single time. That's not just me being humble. For those who do not know, Elio and Linda, his I think wife, certainly partner, they are George R. R. Martin's go-to people. I think he calls them his memory in Westeros. When there's a detail that he wants to just to clear up in his mind, then he goes to them. They co-wrote The World of Ice and Fire with him. So if you're after some who within the fandom are the people who have got the greatest knowledge and understanding, then Elio and Linda are it. Cloaked One, thank you very much. Again, picking up something for someone else, saying for Mattia Dominique, will you participate or be watching the virtual Ice and Fire Con this weekend? I'll be there for most of the panels. To be honest, I was aware that they were going virtual. I didn't know it was open to people. I haven't thought about it, but thank you very much. I will check it out. Thank you. I'm sure they've got some excellent people there, though. It's normally quite a small. I haven't been, but my understanding is normally quite a small con. So it would be interesting to see who they would get. Happy name day to Renly's Peach. Marcus Targaryen saying the Maesters killed them. Almost certainly the Maesters killed the dragons. Andrew Kay saying, do you think the leaks from the Valyria series concept of there being factions in Valyria like the Sphinxes, young dragons and freeholders are canon from George R. R. Martin or not? Well, I don't think they're canon. They may have come from George R. R. Martin. It's certainly the kind of the feel, the elephants and the tigers they have in Volantis as names of political parties, and we know that in Volantis they are holding on tight to the idea that they are the inheritors of what was going on in Valyria. So it makes sense that naming political parties after animals is from Old Valyria, and Old Valyria liked to use the sort of the mixed up animals. So yes, it would make perfect sense. I don't think it's canon. It may well have come from George R. R. Martin, but I don't think that's canon. Reflective Rambling saying another Valyria origin is that they were sheep people. Lazar are often dismissed. Any chance of them echoing this in the future and ending up on top of the world and cackling madly? Yeah, so that was their shepherds that was one of the myths at the beginning of the Valyrians, who stumbled across some dragons and then just learned how to bond with them and all the rest of it. So the Lazarine are much put upon people from the Dothraki, we sheep people. So we should have more time for them. They don't come out very well on this. The only thing I would say there is, if the Dothraki nation do up sticks and head over to Westeros, then I think they will have a much better life afterwards without people slaughtering their families and taking some people off to be slaves. That would be a good outcome for them. Correction Unknown saying, I don't believe Elio goes too deep on his channel about theories and the goings on of A Song of Ice and Fire, but his theories would be interesting for sure. Yeah, so no, I don't think they do, because it's almost, they're almost in the inner circle. George R. R. Martin doesn't write with them. They don't know anything like this, but I think for them to be theorizing is probably sort of slightly missing the point of what their role is. Sydney. Renly's Peach saying it's your kid's birthday, not yours. Well, happy birthday to your child. I hope that they have a great day. Sydney K saying, why did Tywin forbid Tyrion to go with Geryon? if indeed he wanted to be rid of Tyrion. Would Tyrion's death be too close to besmirching his own honor by permitting him going? I mean, I think he thought the whole thing was just a huge waste of time. So Geryon was old enough to do what he wanted to do. Tyrion could be told not to. So I think it's as simple as that. And Tyrion, yes, he might not have valued him as a son, so to speak, but he did value him as an asset to the family. He tried to marry him off several times, thinking that he could use him as a bargaining chip. So, yeah, he was not unaware of the point of having Tyrion there, but he didn't see the point. Why would you send him off? That clearly a fool's mission, going to try and rescue a Bright War from old Valyria. Andrew K, you mentioned possibly going into Dance of the Dragons live streams at some point. Any intention anytime soon? I will. What I think I might do is finish my series of videos on the Dance of the Dragons and then go through it in live streams before the TV show. What I'm thinking at the moment is that I don't even want to say it out loud, but I'm starting to feel that the Winds of Winter is going to come soon. So I'm starting to mentally shift my brain to maybe going through trying to work out what arcs we've got going into the Winds of Winter. Maybe that's where we'll go next. And also Lord of the Rings. I will be doing some Lord of the Rings live streams when we're heading towards the summer. Lady Leaf Underhill saying virtual Ice and Fire Con will be live streams like this starting in half an hour and going through Sunday, I think. Well, if it's starting in half an hour, then after this, please do go and check them out. Check out virtual Ice and Fire Con. I'm sure it will be excellent. And tell them I sent you. Just quickly flicking back through. I think that's probably me caught up. Okay, so with that, I will just say once more, as I always do, thank you so much to my patrons. If you want to support this channel, if you want to help me do what I do, and if you want to get access to some Patreon benefits, there will be a link appearing here if you're watching back a little bit later. If you want more of these live streams, there will be a link appearing somewhere around here. Okay, next week maybe we'll head a little bit further east. Maybe we'll look at Karth and Asshai or Slaver's Bay, perhaps. Let's do Slaver's Bay next week. Marine and all of that. But until next week, take care, everyone. Look after yourselves, and I will see you soon.